We're going to rank the top 5 remaining players in the NBA playoffs. Okay. We're going to do it. We're going to do it as a group effort and get into a little bit of a debate. Okay. So let's just start with this. We all agree that that Nikola Jokic is at number 1, correct? Does anybody want to argue that at all whatsoever?
No. Agreed.
Okay. So we have Nikola Jokic at number 1. Who's number 2? And let's start with you, Carson. Who's the second best player remaining in the playoffs right now?
This is in terms of who would I want for the remainder of these playoffs, like based on the level they've been playing at
Purely in a vacuum,
in
playing
a
at this
vacuum.
level
Big. Okay.
in a vacuum, but within the scope of this playoff run. So, for instance, I want you to evaluate Anthony Edwards and guys like guys like Jalen Brunson. I want you to evaluate them within the lens of how they're playing in this postseason run.
So that's what makes this tricky because I do think that Luka is the second best player remaining, big picture. I also think Luka has been the second best player on his own team in this playoff run. And even though he figured a lot of things out last game and got his attitude together and the pull-up jumpers were falling in a way they just haven't been, and his decision making was great, and he was getting downhill more, he was engaged defensively. He's been so I don't even know if I would say up and down. It's been more bad than good, considerably more bad
Yeah.
than good for Luka, considering the standard that we hold him to. To me, Ant's been the top 2 guy in this playoff run. And part of that is like, yeah, he's been unbelievable as a pull-up shooter, and he finally had a clunker in game 5 where those shots just weren't falling, and that was rough. But also, like, I really like a lot of the shots that he's getting as a pull-up shooter. I don't think it's always going to be this good, but I also do think it's legitimately better than it was in the regular season, and he has taken a jump in every postseason. He's defending at a high level. The athleticism just does not stop. His willingness to dominate a game. I feel like he's earned 2 right now, and that's not big picture. Like, I would still have Luka and I would have SGA higher on my player rankings, but Ant's been a top 2 guy in these playoffs so far.
Ant's number 2 for me as well. Like when the difference I would make is I think Luka's ceiling is higher, but I think Ant's floor has consistently been higher in these playoffs. Like, Ant's drawing all these double teams too when his pull up jump shooting isn't hitting, and he's making good decisions. But what we were talking about on our show too is the fact that, when Ant gets a double, he's not really going to he's not going to punish you for the worst part. Like, he's not ever going to kick weak side to the corner or like that nail in the coffin type pass he's going to make the right decision. And so that's why I say on like at his ceiling when Luka's drawing those kind of coverages and he's on and he's strong and he's getting downhill, Luka I think is definitively number 2. But like the floor that we've gotten from Ant has been so phenomenal. And I mean, Jason, you say he's unguardable. Like already, I do, man. Nobody can stay in front of the kid. And yeah, the level he's been at, I think he's number 2. And I'm gonna spoil it a little bit, guys. I think I'd have Luka maybe 4 or 5 out of the remaining guys. Like just with where he's been at, where his floor's been at, and where he's been at consistently, Luka's probably lower than I would have him at full health.
So I think it's unquestionable that Ant has been the second best player in this postseason run based solely on results, based on how he's played to this point. I'm going to bump him to 3 for Luka, though, in the sense that even though Luka has had some really bad moments, like if I was picking players that I'd want to lead my team going into the conference finals, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
I just trust Luka a little bit more with his experience and a little bit more of his like half court surgery type of stuff to be a little bit more resilient to adjustments and things along those lines over the course of the series. And it's just a respect to the fact that I do believe Luka is the second best player in the world right now. So I'm going to go with Luka at 2 on my list, but I would put
Okay.
Ant at 3. I'm assuming, Carson, you would put Ant or you'd put Luka at 3 as well, right?
I would, although I have been concerned by a lot of what we've seen. And I think, like, even as his jumpers start falling more, just the fact that he hasn't been getting downhill consistently. And I think the knee is definitely a component in that. Like, we are definitely not seeing the Luka that we're used to. So I don't want to be overly encouraged just because game 5 was really good, but I do just think he's earned the recognition just because of how great of a basketball player he is and the offensive mastery. Long story short, yes, I would still have him at 3, even though I definitely don't think he's been at that level consistently in these playoffs.
Okay, so Logan, since you think Luka's at 17 and he's a bum, who do you have at 3?
He's not a bum. Thank you for putting those words in my mouth, Jason. Luka, I'm not super encouraged consistency wise, and I agree with you guys. Like at full strength, I think Luka's definitively number 2, but I think they gave him some of that good before game 5, some of that Big Ben special in his
Milk
leg
of the
and
poppy.
something like that. I think they gave him, some of that you ain't gonna feel it during the game, and I think it was able to get him to lock in a little more. I am just skeptical at how healthy he's going to be, how much he's moaning at the refs, how much he's concerned with that aspect of the game. Mr. Consistent has been SGA, and like I just bank on it. Like I think that he might be the most consistent scorer in basketball. If I need 30, man, like I wouldn't put him over Jokic, but I might put him 2. SGA just has an unstoppable skill set, and I think his playmaking numbers would look better if his teammates were hitting looks. Like he's been so good as a decision maker. He's been so great at dealing with doubles. He's gotten any bucket that he's wanted. And in the fourth quarter of these games, like he stepped his game up. It's been about the consistency for me in these playoffs. And Luka has just consistently played below his means. Is that still a really good freaking basketball player? Yeah. But I'd rather take the guy that has been consistently great and great in almost every single game in these playoffs, and that's been SGA. And so again, this is nothing against Luka. I think Luka at full strength is number 2, but I wouldn't put him over SGA in these playoffs thus far.
Okay, so I have Carson at Jokic and Luka, and I have Logan at Jokic and SGA.
Correct.
I am going to tweak mine because I made a mistake. This was something I intended to do, but I made a mistake. I'm moving Ant down to 4, and I'm putting Jayson Tatum at 3. Ooh. And here's the reason why. I'm a huge believer in Ant. I think he might actually be my favorite player. And I think that Ant is going to be better than Jayson Tatum within 18 months. Like I think that's how highly I think of Ant. Ant right now though is just a little bit volatile, like any other 22-year-old in terms of his like just ability to handle the random kind of curveballs that the NBA playoffs can throw at you. Kind of like him just getting completely blindsided by the double teaming in game 5, for instance. I also think Ant has had some really bad defensive moments in this postseason. And he's one of those guys that's like devastating on the ball. And I thought he had his best defensive game of the postseason tonight against Jamal Murray.
He was great.
Much better screen navigation, just stayed attached to him a lot better. But a big part of what happened that kind of hurt the team in game 3 and game 4 was Ant just kept losing Jamal on screens. And that's a big weakness in his game at this point. Jayson Tatum can be a frustrating basketball player. God knows that I've gone into that in excruciating detail over the course of the last few years. And there are things that I despise about his approach and that I wish that he could get better at in terms of his like scoring resiliency, in terms of like his ability to be efficient. Like he shot over 50% for the first time all postseason last night.
Yeah.
Like he's not having a good scoring playoff run. That said, I think Jayson Tatum has been underrated in a bunch of key areas in this playoff run. First of all, I think he's been unbelievable defensively. He's arguably their smartest and most impactful team defender in terms of like just his versatility, his ability to switch everything. Like, oh, let's put him on Evan Mobley let's put him on Evan Mobley to start a playoff series so that we can switch ball screens and we know we're not giving up anything there, rebounding or rim protection even. Like there's just a lot of upside there. He's an excellent rebounder in a way that I think is really underrated at his position. He's averaging over 10 rebounds in the Cavs series. Another big piece of it too for me is like he's uniquely kind of like a nice fit with this group because his passivity and his willingness to just make the right play kind of allows a lot of the other guys to kind of stay to be more impactful. I think the big weakness of his is like identifying when to be like, no, give me the damn ball and get out of my way. And that's why I don't have him higher on this list. That's why I think that Jokic and Luka are clearly better basketball players than him. I think they just are better at identifying that balance between playing in the flow of the game versus being really aggressive. So I think right now Tatum's floor is so much higher than Ant's just because he's a more experienced, better kind of like all around basketball player that I'm putting him at 3. But to be clear to Ant, I think he's been the second best player in this playoff run to this point. I'm just saying, like, if I was picking players for a 7-game series that started tomorrow in a vacuum, I think Tatum is just a little bit more reliable in all of the other areas of the game. Where would you guys have Tatum? Would you guys have Tatum in your top 5?
So I feel very confident about Ant above him. To me, the gap in defensive consistency does not offset the fact that at the end of the day, I don't think there's any world in which Jayson Tatum could be doing what Anthony Edwards has consistently done, just as that takeover offensive number one, 30 a night on 66% true shooting. And yes, hasn't been great as a playmaker, has been mostly good enough. When we are talking about projecting this, as I mentioned, like, he has an effective field goal percentage of 57.5 on pull-up jumpers in the playoffs versus 44% in the regular season. That is not going to be sustained. That is like better than any single pull-up jump shooter in basketball this year. But he is in a rhythm right now, and like that rhythm has been pretty consistent over the course of these 10 games. I just think Ant is a significantly better scorer of the basketball at the end of the day. I think his unrelenting downhill pressure combined with the fact that right now he is just way better as a pull-up shooter, I just don't think Tatum could do what he's doing right now. And I don't agree that Tatum is in some ways like a very good connective number one. But also when you're in Boston, you get to have the luxury of doing that because you can have offensive explosions from Derek White for a series. You can have Jaylen Brown be your best offensive player, which I would argue up until last game, like, well, he's been their best scorer throughout this playoffs. I would say Jaylen Brown has been. So I would have Tatum at 5. I would have SGA confidently at 4. I think his floor as a scorer is just outstanding. And again, I think he is capable of providing a consistency there that I don't get from Tatum. SGA is shooting 53% from the mid-range and even facing, as we've talked about, a great defense with great athletes on the perimeter. Derrick Jones Jr. is a tough draw, packed paints. He's the best downhill guard in the league, and he can't get all the way downhill right now. And he is still killing you with great volume and efficiency. He's still making the right reads, and he's having a real defensive impact. I think SGA is a better basketball player than Jayson Tatum, both within the context of this run and outside of it. 5 is tough because I really have so much respect for Jalen Brunson and what he's done as an offensive number one. But I do think that is the threshold at which, like, the all-around value of Tatum does surpass the singular shot-making value that you get from Jalen Brunson and playmaking because he's drawing such obscene amounts of offensive attention. Like, I do think Brunson is clearly a better offensive player, but I do think Tatum is the better all-around basketball player, and I would take him going forward. But that's even close for me, so I'd have Tatum 5.
Okay,
Yeah,
hold on for a second, Logan.
Yeah.
So I'm actually putting Jalen Brunson at 5. I think that again, we're splitting hairs here. This is a tier of players that's probably 6 long, not 5 long, but we're forcing it to 5 for the sake of some good debate. So I'd have SGA at 6, and I certainly don't see much of a gap really between 3 and 6. Really between 2 and 6. I don't see much of a gap there. Like, Jokic is kind of on a tier on his own. So don't take this as an insult, Thunder fans. I just am kind of giving this as an opportunity to shout out Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson, to me, has had kind of a similar job to Shai in this postseason, and I just think he's done a better job of it. In fact, I would argue that, like, there's more pressure on Jalen Brunson to produce every single game. Like, to put it simply, like, we just talked about how we think the Knicks are going to beat the Pacers, and it requires Brunson to go score 70 points in those 2 games or 35-40 in a 1 game if they close it out. Like, it is an absolute necessity for Jalen Brunson to just completely tattoo those guys as a scorer the entirety of 1 or both of those games. And he just continually shows up every single time they need him to. I think he's one of those guys too, where his like lack of physical imposition on the game kind of makes people think what he's doing is fluky. And look, I need to really, really dive into the tape to kind of, and I plan on doing that this summer to kind of get like a better feel for what makes Jalen Brunson such a dominant scorer. My on the surface kind of take on it is, like kind of 30,000 feet, is just he's the ultimate. It reminds me of Kyrie in the sense that, like, he literally has every move in the book.
Yeah.
He can shoot step back threes. He can hit forward moving threes off of ball screens. He can do it going both directions. He can hit pull up mid-range jump shots in ball screens. He can hit turn your back to the basket, fade away jump shots in ISO and post-up situations. He's got all of the floaters and hooks from the short range, and he can finish at the rim, and he's a great playmaker. And so like he literally can do it all. And that in and of itself, I think kind of gives him a level of versatility that he can always kind of throw a change up at whatever defender is guarding him. And that makes him kind of super resilient in these situations. And so even though like, yeah, in a vacuum, I would take Shai to run a franchise because I think he's younger and more physically gifted. And obviously like there's a lot of upside there. But to me, like Jalen Brunson deserves his flowers for this playoff run. And I think he's just done a better job of what Shai's doing on a nightly basis in a higher pressure situation for a team who needs it more. And so I put Jalen Brunson at 5. So Logan, I have you at, so that puts my list at Jokic, Luka, Tatum, Ant, Brunson. Carson's at Jokic, Ant, Luka, SGA, Tatum. Logan, I have you at Jokic, Ant, SGA, and we need your 4 and 5.
Luka and then Brunson. I just want to ask real quick, Jason, what do you mean about by his lack of physical imposition like on the game? Like I think Brunson's a pretty physical guy.
No, he plays a physical brand. When I say what I mean is he's not particularly fast. He's not particularly strong. Well, he is a strong player for his size, but he's not like particularly big. He's not particularly tall or athletic. Like he's straight up beating these dudes with skill development and just IQ and savvy and audacity and just like alpha dog. You can't guard me. Like that he's just doing it. I'll tell you the Ball Don't Stop would love him. He's just straight hooping these guys into the dirt.
Oh my
man.
God, he must love him. But he's no Jamal Crawford. I can tell you that.
The reason I would go with Brunson and like SGA over Tatum, you make a great argument, I think, Jason, about what.
So you have Tatum outside the top 5 entirely.
I wouldn't. I mean, I'm the resident Boston Celtics and Jayson Tatum hater. I will wear the hat. I will wear the hat. I will be the spokesperson for the campaign. Yeah, like I think you make a great case for Tatum with what he brings defensively, with how great he has been on the boards, and how imperative that is to Boston's winning formula. Like without Kristaps Porzingis, Boston is kind of at a significant size and interior disadvantage with Horford. Like you need Tatum to play that role. And so I think he's great at those things and all the extra things, but I just don't think Jayson Tatum could do what Jalen Brunson is doing right now. I don't think Jayson Tatum could do what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing right now. Like Jayson Tatum has such a high ceiling when his pull-up jumper is going, and that's great. But I've also seen Jayson Tatum's offensive floor, and it's a pit, man. It is a big hole. Like Tatum brings such a lack of offensive consistency that I would always take Brunson and SGA over them because I can just count on these guys to consistently deliver. I don't trust Jayson Tatum to consistently deliver. Like he's got all the tools, he's got all the traits, but it's about putting it together. And SGA and Brunson to me clear him as number 1 scorers and number 1 playmakers. And I just value their offensive skill sets more than Tatum. I don't know why you guys act surprised. Like I had Tatum outside of my top 10 players.
I'm not
entering the
surprised.
playoffs. Yeah, like
I'm not surprised.
Tatum
and it's
is
honestly, it's not a big gap for me. Like I do view Tatum more highly as an overall basketball player. However, what Brunson is doing right now is ridiculous, and there's nothing fluky about it. Like I compared him, I don't know, 6 weeks ago maybe, or really he and this whole Knicks team to being very Iverson and early 2006ers-esque in that you have this team that is built on high effort, defensive-minded guys. It's different, of course, because now it's 2024 and most of these dudes can shoot, but you have no other shot creators, and you have this small guard who has to bear a ridiculous offensive burden. And it's not possible to be super efficient under those circumstances. Like Jalen Brunson's true shooting percentage is 54 in these playoffs, well below league average. There's no question he has been one of the best offensive engines because he is the only reliable shot creator. And my God, he's
none of them are bad shots.
Points of offense. Yeah.
None of them are bad shots because they literally need it. Like if he takes a tough turnaround fadeaway, you're like, that's the highest value shot they can get on this possession. And then honestly, like one of the things that you're hitting there too with the 54% true shooting percentage, it's being amplified by offensive rebounding because he's just getting so many additional attempts.
True. So what I think is really interesting about the Brunson Tatum dynamic is like, there's no question that both of them is very much engineered for their current situation. Like Jayson Tatum is never going to need to carry the offensive burden that Jalen Brunson does as a scorer, as a creator, him being such a strong part of that connected elite when they're dialed in defense. That's what the Boston Celtics need. Whereas I think if Jayson Tatum were on the New York Knicks, like, you would not be seeing the level of offensive production that you're getting from Jalen Brunson. So that one is legitimately tough to me. But when I think about the ceiling of configuring a team around either one of them, I do think it's a little bit higher with Tatum, just marginally so, because of course Brunson's doing this under difficult circumstances, but he's never going to be like the most efficient offensive number one because of some of his size limitations. He's incredible. And then it is like the gap in the two-way impact, and Jayson Tatum being one of the best rebounders in these playoffs. And by the way, that's part of the reason that I go SGA over Brunson. It's not purely about the offensive impact. It's not to say that Brunson is bad defensively. We all know he's a champion charge taker, but like, SGA is making impactful plays as a helper. He's averaging like over 3 stocks a game. Like, he's not all world there, but he's legitimately quite good. And I think that that's where the gap is as much as anything.
This was fun. One last thing I want to hit just on the Tatum thing. Like, let's not forget it that he does play one of the most important positions athletically in the league, which is like that
Absolutely.
big forward. Like, this is the guy that's responsible for low man responsibilities a lot of the time. This is the guy that has to clean up the defensive glass a lot of the time. This is the guy that has to usually
Especially
bang with
Horford
a
at the
larger
5.
post player. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I think that again, I believe truly everything I said about Ant as it pertains to Tatum. I think that Ant's ceiling as a pull-up jump shooter and his first step are just going to be what allows Ant to enter into conversations both currently and all time that Tatum is kind of incapable of entering into. That said, like, focusing on the scoring is just one small part of what Jayson Tatum does. And as much as he's been frustrating and plateauing as a pull-up shooter and as an efficient scorer, especially in the post-up setting, in the postseason setting, his overall impact has been ascending, in my opinion. I thought the end of that game against Cleveland last night was one of his best moments as an NBA player, in the sense that, like, he just looked like the old savvy. It reminded me of like LeBron, where it's like he's not doing anything stupid other than just looking the direction the defense is leaning and throwing basic swing and skip passes that set guys up for success. And so I just want to make sure that Tatum gets the appropriate level of respect that he deserves that goes beyond just the scoring piece.